Hey guys, this is Paul from Passion Consulting, and welcome to the first part of my summary and my Scrum guide overview. So, what I really want to do in this first part, guys, is tell you, you know, why why it's important to understand what's in the Scrum guide in depth and how that's going to help you when you go forward to do an exam, or even if you're not doing an exam, how it's really going to help you in your everyday work using Scrum. So the first thing I've highlighted here in the Scrum Guide is the fact that the Scrum Guide, which was written by Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, is the definitive guide to Scrum and the rules of the game. And so you may ask, well, why is that important? Well, the reason why that's important is because from my experience in industry, one of the number one reasons why people go wrong with Scrum is because they don't truly, really understand the foundation. What you've just seen Ted explain is an overview, but what I'm going to be doing in these sections is going through the exact, little excerpts from the Scrum Guide, which may be things people get confused about in industry or in the exam when you go towards a certification. So the first thing I want to draw out here is that this is the rule book, guys. This is what you need to read and understand if you want to be doing Scrum correctly. If you deviate from this, and don't get me wrong, in life, there are always reasons for doing things for a common sense reason. I always say, if common sense tells you to do it or not to do it, and it really does go against something in here, and it really is common sense, then, think about whether you want to do that. But I've never had, I can't remember a situation where I've had to completely contravene one of these rules. So this is the first thing I want to say, is that this is the definitive guide to really understand this book. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that when Ken and Jeff wrote this originally, there were some minor changes. Some would say major, but I think they are subtle but distinct changes. And this was done in July of 2013. So this is the newest revision at the current time of me recording this, of the book, of the guide. And it's just, important to know that there was a revision. So where in the video I mentioned the original Scrum Guide and some of the wording slightly different, that's because there was a revision, at least one revision before this. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is just to reiterate that the purpose of the Scrum Guide written here highlights that Scrum frameworks for developing and sustaining complex products. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because if you're doing something really simple, like, building a couple of web pages or something really, really quick, then it may be overkill for you to use Scrum, because planning out with a team building a web page, having a retrospective on building a web page, having stand-ups about building a web page may well be overkill if the web page is simple. There are some situations in which you may want to do that. But the key thing I want to draw out here is that Scrum is most effective if you're doing something complex. Okay? That doesn't mean you can't use it for doing something simple, but it was built for doing something complex. The next thing I'm drawing your attention to here is the actual definition of Scrum. Scrum's a framework. So rather than it being a complete process, something that tells you every little detail about building a product, Scrum is actually a framework, and it can be used to build these complex products, and it has the structure, it has everything you need to bring a team together to make sure you're always inspecting on your progress and adapting and improving and delivering. That's the main thing, is delivering often. But what it isn't is the answer to every single problem. There are going to be things that you will discover while using Scrum to plug the gaps. For example, when you work in a sprint, using test-driven development is something people use in the software world. Now, Scrum doesn't say you have to do that, but it's a well-known method of making sure that you get a shippable increment, or you get something of a high quality that is tested regularly. So this is one example of how Scrum is a framework as opposed to all the answers, as opposed to a complete process. And here again, it says that it's not a process for building products, rather it's a framework within which you can employ various processes and techniques. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that within the definition in the Scrum Guide. The next part is the theory, so just drawing your attention again to the fact that It uses empirical process control theory. And the key thing here that I wanted to draw your attention to, that perhaps wasn't drawn out enough in the overview that I asked Ted to do, was that empiricism is about learning from the mistakes of the past and improving and making new decisions and making changes and adapting. So the whole point of using empiricism is that it's really powerful, guys, to have proof from the past and evidence from the past. Everything about Scrum is about using the evidence of the past to improve time and time again. And some more here about the 3 pillars, which I think you've been through in enough detail. And incidentally, the things I'm going through are really useful if you're going for certification as well as in the real life. I've drawn attention here to the fact that when you're being when as a team, so just a recap, that transparency is about being really open and honest as a team and admitting that when something's done, it's not done until it really, really is done. Everything's done. There's nothing else to do. And that's important because because commonly on projects, there are situations where people just don't feel confident enough to say that something's not done. And that leads to problems down the road where people think that a project's complete and actually it's not, because there's more testing or there's more to build. So that's why I've drawn attention here to the fact that the team should share a common definition of done. So typically that can be things like saying that a product is not done and complete. Sorry, a piece of a product is not done and complete. So at the end of a sprint, you're not finished unless whatever you've built is fully tested. All of the tasks are complete. It matches the original designs that the designers have put forward. Those are just a few things. And of course that the product owner's acceptance criteria is met, which is something I'll come to later. Next, I've drawn attention to inspection. So inspection, one thing I didn't draw out, or I didn't ask Ted to draw out in the video, is that inspection shouldn't be so frequent that it gets in the way of the work. So in other words, if you were to have a sprint and you were going to make that sprint daily, there probably wouldn't be enough time for a team to build up enough momentum in the direction of completing that piece of work. So it's getting in the way of actually doing the work. Whereas what I found is a week often has been too short. You know, depending on the project, a week may be absolutely fine. But often in my experiences, and it does need to be based on your experiences, a week has been too short a space of time to build up momentum. Whereas 2 weeks has been perfect. So this is just saying that one of the things I want you to realise about this is that having setting the sprint length is very important, because that is the time at which you inspect at the end of a sprint. At the end here, I've drawn your attention to a few things. So the things that I've drawn attention to here are the 4 formal events within Scrum. And this is important because in the exam, they're going to want you to know. They're going to want you to know what are the events within Scrum, or time boxes, which was a previous name in the original Scrum guide. So when people either add meetings on top of this, which is fine, you can have extra meetings on top of this, or they take away from this, they need to understand that to be doing Scrum, you need to be doing these 4. You need to be having planning. You need to be having a daily Scrum for coordination. You need to be having a sprint review to make sure the stakeholders are having conversations with the team and feeding back into the next sprint. And you need to be having a retrospective to make sure you improve. If you take away, guys, from any of these, you're not doing Scrum. Let me say that again, because this is often missed. People often have 3 out of the 4. But if you take away from any of these, you are effectively not doing Scrum. You can add to them, and I always say you can always do more. You shouldn't be deliberately doing more unless there's a common sense need. But things like product backlog grooming are recommended within Scrum. But these are the 4 formal events that need to take place. So I really wanted to draw that out here. Okay, guys, well, that's the end of this section. Thank you very much for your time, and I will speak to you in the next section.